Okay,
Well,
go ahead.
hey, welcome. Thank you for coming. Thank you for showing up. She's actually on a break right now from work, so look, she's even wearing her stethoscope. That's actually,
Yes, my fancy nurse
oh my god,
stethoscope.
that actually makes it so legit. Okay, so firstly, what do you do for a living?
I'm an ER nurse. That's why you brought me here, bro.
Okay. Just want to get that out for the people. She's an ER nurse.
Okay.
Okay, number two. This one's a little bit harder. What is coronavirus?
A coronavirus is a family of viruses. It's the same family that SARS was in. This is a variant of that family, the thing that's going around right now. And it's causing respiratory problems. So basically, what you get is, if you catch it, you pretty much just get flu symptoms. So just kind of difficulty breathing, a dry cough.
Perfect.
If you're healthy.
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
So what's been your experience so far with coronavirus, like in the hospital or in general?
In general, seeing it on the news, just like everybody else, pretty much. I've been trying to keep an eye on different countries and what's happening in all the different countries, and also what the WHO is saying right now and what politicians are saying, and if things make sense, if everyone's saying things that make sense in relation to each other, which they don't a lot of the time. So today the department is like very slow and there's not that many people coming, and I feel like it's because like a lot of us have the impression it's because people are scared to come. It's problematic, and now we're kind of changing our screening techniques. We just today found out that we have to screen pretty much everybody who comes in with respiratory symptoms. We have to do a test because they want to make sure that they're getting the right numbers of how many people actually have it. You can imagine why that's a problem. Literally everybody coming in with any cough of any kind is going to have to be tested, and the testing is not cheap, and it also requires space to do it in, because as staff we can't just test in our regular clothes. Like, we have to be wearing isolation equipment to do the test.
What it sounds like, what you're talking about is a lot of screening procedures, right? So how exactly can they screen asymptomatic individuals? Recently I was like looking at some press conferences in the States, and they're talking about how actually identifying the asymptomatic individuals is the problem, because that's how the community spread happens most quickly. So what kind of procedures are we looking at for that?
There are no procedures for that. Anybody who has traveled anywhere outside of their country has to be on isolation for 14 days when they come back. That is the bottom line. That's what they're saying now.
Yeah.
So that's why now we're just testing anybody who has a cough or cold. Because if you're traveling, you should be on isolation. It's very hard this is why we're all so confused about it, because they're just changing the rules on us like pretty much every day. Like every day there's new data, every day there's new rules of like what we're testing, how we're screening, things like that. So right now it's just basically all travel. You're supposed to be quarantining yourself for 14 days after the travel. That's just like the best protocol for now. There's nothing you can do about no symptoms. Like, just because you don't have symptoms, it's possible you are infected, but you just didn't have any symptoms. Really, there's nothing we can do about that because we don't know.
Yeah, that makes sense. Yeah. So then I have to ask you, why do you think cases are slowing down in China? And now that they closed the last coronavirus hospital, which was supposedly due to a lack of need, is that something positive we should consider? How should we perceive that information? Do you think it's something that,
Wait, they closed like in China?
Yeah, there was the last coronavirus hospital. They actually closed it down because there wasn't a need for it anymore. And now they shipped some of those coronavirus doctors all the way to Italy because they knew those procedures and they had experience with the virus. Is this a silver lining? Like, how can we interpret this type of information?
Yeah. So a lot of people are being warned to not suddenly become too confident about this, because it basically the best case scenario is that it has peaked in China, which means that it's on its downtrend, because all infections, they basically go on an incline, they peak, and then they come back down. So hopefully China's on its down, which means that other countries are to follow and the whole world is to follow. But the problem is that we don't know when that will happen, because China was in isolation for like over a month for that to happen, and it was very strict isolation that other countries are not at that level yet. There's like kind of two perspectives on this. Like, that some people do think that that China is being overzealous kind of in shutting things down and kind of saying, oh, we're better, like we're getting better, because they just want their economy to come back up. And they're basically, the best way to do that is for people to think, okay, it's over there, so we can, go on with our business. But they're still screening people. Like they're still, even when businesses are opening up, they're still screening any fevers, they send them home, any kind of symptoms, they send them home still. So they're still being very cautious about it despite their numbers decreasing. But yeah, it's a good sign that their numbers are decreasing. But the real kind of thing now is Italy. Like Italy is the hotspot right now. They're the ones that are suffering the most from this as a country. And again, Italy has the oldest population in the world. It is very highly polluted. It, they live in close quarters with each other. They kind of have a great, it's like a perfect place for the virus to breed.
Yeah.
So of course it's kind of increasing. And the other thing is that they don't have enough, they had something or a couple thousand isolation room, ICU rooms, for a 60 million population that's full of old people. So that's kind of the biggest challenge for them, is just having space to be able to take care of everybody.
Right. And now I got to ask, do you think this panic is warranted? I understand that, self-quarantine does stop the spread, and that obviously makes logical sense. But do you think people buying toilet paper, in bulk is the way to really help themselves in this panic?
No.
If they do have to stay inside for an X amount of period of time that they can't really control, they'll need toilet paper. That's the logic.
Yeah, but that's kind of going to be the least of your concerns at that point, is the toilet paper.
I know.
Indoors,
how do you think the world will look like in the next 3 months, 6 months, and then 9 months? What kind of predictions do you have in terms of how they're going to actually stop the spread, what the government might do, how hospitals might advance?
I don't think we're going to go to that level, because I don't see it kind of spreading the same here. I don't think we have the same conditions as Italy. We don't have those kind of conditions.
Yeah.
We don't spend that much time together as a people. We're not outside, hanging out together all the time. And we don't have as old of a population. And I think we have the kind of healthcare resources available already that we could take care of a larger number than Italy. But that's just my, I think we have that. I don't know the numbers, but I don't really see that happening. I think it's probably going to die down around mid-May. June. Yeah. I don't see it going much further. And then we're just going to go back to exactly what we're doing. All the lessons will fly out the window and we will just continue on with our lives, because that's what happens all the time. Nobody ever heeds any of this. You know how people are saying this has brought out so much about public health and about how it's insufficient and all this stuff. I think right after this is done, it's just going to go right back, because it just doesn't make political sense to be funding public health when nothing's happening. Again, I get that, but it's the point of funding public health is when things happen, to have the resources. Right. So yeah, it's a challenging one, and I don't think anyone will really change that much, just because history shows we don't change that much as people.
It's true.
As much as we'd like to believe we do.
Yeah. So and we'll anticipate that things will be fine in the future as well, unless there are some preventative measures that are implemented, or something that can actually well, to be fair, I do think it was a big enough of a crisis that it might motivate enough policymakers. So we'll have to see.
There's actually a series on Netflix called Explained, and they had an episode on pandemics. And if you watch that episode, they predicted this to a T. They predicted exactly where it would come from. They predicted exactly where it would spread, what would spread it most, the fact that we have so much good transportation now, then people are moving all over the world. And how that's affecting the spread. And they were talking about how we need to be prepared. And this was a year ago. And they were saying how public health needs to be prepared for the next pandemic, because it's coming, it's gonna happen, because the conditions are so good right now. We have the travel, we have, the markets, and they predicted it would come from China too, because they were predicting the animal markets. The thing about animal markets is that you have all these live animals, and they're all different species, and they're all interacting together. So any viruses they have can start interacting with each other and start forming new viruses, and these are much more likely to get into the human stream, and then they can be spread that way. And we don't have anything against them, because they're brand new viruses. So they predicted that's exactly where it would come from, and that is where it came from. And they basically were saying we need to be prepared for this. And that's why I'm saying I don't think it's going to change that much even after this, because like we had the swine flu and that passed and nothing changed. We had SARS and clearly nothing changed because we're having the same issues that we had with SARS come up.
What's like one thing you wish people knew about coronavirus that they don't, or it seems like they don't?
You don't need to be tested. It's silly because, we get so many people come in and they're like, they just come in, they just say, I just want to be tested. I think I have it. And it's like, what is the relevance of you having it? Like, even if you have the flu,
I know,
you're still going to follow the same protocol. You're going to go home. You're going to get better. You're going to not go near people because you can spread it just like you can spread corona.
Yes.
So it really, like, bottom line, unless it's like you're having a severe episode and they need to figure out like what's going on, because if it's a different kind of pneumonia, then they could actually treat it. That's the only case where you would want to know what kind of pneumonia you have. But if it's viral, you don't have a treatment anyway. So even if you think even if it's the flu, you're going to do the same things. So you don't need to be tested. So to have these like people just coming in and just wanting it for the sake of wanting it, I think it's just paranoia
of having it. And also, I would assume that we can also make a distinction between the vulnerable population getting tested and then like the people who are kind of in a lower risk rate of mortality and stuff. So like Johnny, who's 23, plays volleyball in his spare time, probably shouldn't be getting tested. But Janice in the senior home should, theoretically, right? Like that's just the logic. So people are just self-isolating all over Toronto and Montreal. So I predicted this 2 weeks ago, and people were like, "You're being dramatic," and I was like, "No, this can't happen."
Like, you don't have to be the dramatic to the level of like, the reason people are buying out grocery stores is because they're worried like we're going to be trapped in our homes. But the virus is not flowing in the air. It's like you have to interact with people to catch it. So you can still leave your house.
I'm ordering Uber Eats. Okay.
Yeah.
And I want to because I'm hungry, right?
I hope if you're ordering Uber Eats, you're hungry. But okay.
I just felt like it's important. People need to know. So I'm ordering Uber Eats because I'm hungry. Can I get coronavirus?
Okay. Technically, coronavirus can stay on surfaces for 6 to 12 hours. So it can live on surfaces. So yes, technically, the chances are low. But yes, you technically can, but it's very, very low chances.
What's the best way to get food if you're trying to self-quarantine and still get food?
The supermarket. But even that is kind of. So my mom was asking me the other day about masks, and she was like, "I want to go. Like, where do I find masks and stuff?" And I told her, like, you don't need a mask. If you wanted to go out and kind of like really protect yourself, the only way is you'd have to be wearing head to toe isolation gear, and you'd have to take it all off before you enter your house. So nobody has that stuff, and nobody's walking around in hazmat suits unless you're like a healthcare worker. So you can't, like, masks are useless. It's not gonna, unless you have to give it to the people that are sick. And that's why it's a problem when people are buying up the masks, because the people that are sick that need them can't use them. So we're doing a disservice to ourselves by that. And the other thing is you actually can't wear a mask for more than 2 to 4 hours. You have to change it. So really, like, if you keep it on all day, you're also not doing anything. So
why is that? Why can you only wear for?
Because they expire. That's just how they work. As you're breathing into them, like, you're kind of like wetting them, and their material doesn't hold up anymore. So it's not really doing the right job.
Yeah, that's interesting. That's a good point, because there's this guy in the States who bought, he bought like all the cleaning supplies, and he bought masks and stuff online, and then he eventually started selling it through Amazon, and now Amazon shut down his account, or like reduced his ability to sell, actually. And no, eBay shut down his account, like just didn't let him, and then Amazon reduced his ability. Now they're saying he should sell at a cost, so like a cost himself, because of what he hoarded over time.
Good. That's the way he gets. That's ridiculous.
Yeah, that's insane. So you're saying give the masks to the vulnerable. I mean, that makes logical sense. Yeah. So then what's your advice for kind of calming down the panic? Because it seems like the more information we receive, that the larger the panic gets, as opposed to diminishing.
Honestly, that's the thing. Like, it's the bottom line is you have to let healthcare workers do what they're doing. You have to not take up space in places where you know they need the space when you don't need it. So it's just kind of about, don't be paranoid. If you really have symptoms and you're feeling really sick and like you can't go on, then you obviously you see a doctor, you go to emergency. But if you're feeling fine and you just have this suspicion or paranoia that you have something, just stay home, stay isolated, and regardless of whether you have it or not, it's going to pass because don't have symptoms. That's the bottom line of it. There's no reason to kind of just like overreact about it. But we're great at overreacting. I think we like to overreact more than we like to use common sense. So that's the challenge.
It's also a heuristic. It's much easier to overreact than to actually employ logic. Like even mentally, like it's a more difficult brain processing required cognitive processing than just being like, oh, we're screwed, and then going on with your day freaked out.
Exactly.
That makes sense for sure.
Yeah.
So I gotta ask, what would have been a better response to the virus from a policy standpoint, from a governmental response? Should closing the borders or transportation? What element should have been actually changed?
Well, it's hard because see, the thing is there was hundreds of cases in China before they admitted that there was something going on. They had their first case in November, and it wasn't until the end of December that they started to say, yeah, this is a thing. So the very first thing would have been if they had just cut travel from China, all China, instead of just Wuhan from the very beginning. That would have cut down a lot of this spread and a lot of timing, because all that happened was people left Wuhan and they went to other parts of China, and then they left China. So if all of China had been on quarantine from the very beginning, that would have been helpful. After that, I would say, I don't know about this whole school thing. Like you asked about the school closures, and I get the message from that, but also when they were initially implemented in Ontario, what they were implemented for was that so people could continue their travel on March break, which is mind-boggling to me that they said basically we anticipate people will be traveling a lot for March break. So what they're doing is giving people 2 weeks after March break to self-quarantine. To me, this sounds like enabling behavior. Like this is like, yeah, go ahead and travel, enjoy your March breaks, and then come back and quarantine. It doesn't make any sense. It's kind of sending the message that education is less important because education is being cut off now for 2 weeks instead of just cutting travel, period, and having people kind of quarantine for the 2 weeks, including March break, not being taken as seriously as it should be. And I think it's ironic because it's kind of like on the one hand we're saying don't panic, it's not that bad, but on the other hand we're saying we're not doing enough. So this is kind of the issue, is because people panic in the wrong direction.
Yeah,
that's what's happening right now. Yeah,
that's a great quote actually. People panic in the wrong direction, and the solutions you're trying to implement, that's really good, because it's like you're performing actions and you're doing that's really good. You're doing some changes, but the changes aren't effective, and it makes no sense to keep doing them. That's a really good point. And do you think the basis of that is really, well, first of all, hold on. I want to ask you a little bit more, because you mentioned how, the spread of the virus originated in just travels. Just people traveling and not stopping the traveling from China, the epicenter, or like Wuhan. Now, my question is, if there was a first case in November and there was a whistleblower trying to identify that case, what could have been done differently from a health policy perspective to ensure that, internationally speaking, China is transparent with their health system and the viruses that are occurring there? Yeah.
I'm going to just proceed with this is the disclaimer thing. I'm not an epidemiology expert whatsoever, but there actually were people in China there was doctors in China trying to alert people to the fact that this virus is existing and that there's something they're seeing that they've never seen before. And they were being silenced. If you get doctors on the front lines telling you that things are happening, that there's a problem here, that this is kind of like our systems are limited now, or that we need this kind of help and that kind of help, I don't think that kind of stuff should be ignored, because these are people who actually work and know what they're talking about. Whereas when you have kind of politicians or even public policy, half politicians, half public policy people telling you things, they're kind of looking with an eye to the money. They're looking with an eye to the politics of the situation. And the matter of fact is, like, healthcare, at the crux of it is healthcare. Like, it's medicine. It's like you have to make sure these people live, right? And it's hard to do that when you have this aspect of like a political play coming into it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, which is, I think, what we've been seeing, and it contributed to the spread, definitely. How are nurses staying safe during this whole thing? How are doctors staying safe? What's going on?
Well, so it's a challenge for nurses too, because, and it's a challenge for like all healthcare staff, because the thing is, anyone now, we're required to be on 2 weeks self-isolation, any travel for all healthcare workers. So we already have like 5+ doctors that are stuck on self-isolation right now. We've got like several nurses coming back from vacations that they can't come back to work because they are now on self-isolation. So, yeah, it's hard, because like now you have to get people to fill these shifts, right? Luckily that we haven't had too many people coming in, period, because people are trying to like stay away. So that's good in a sense, because it is like, if they're coming into emerge every day, like they're gonna catch something, right? So that's good in a sense. But yeah, I don't know. It's just we do our best. So you can't. There's only so much you can do, and once you know, then you can start to kind of put on self-isolation, because sometimes it's not the travel thing. Like the travel thing, we automatically put them in isolation, automatic part of our protocol. But if you don't have that information beforehand, like it's spreading now, regardless of travel. So with that, we can't really do much about. But that's true of everything. It's not just true of corona. Like that was true of the flu, any kind of like C. diff, anything. Like if we don't know, we can't really protect ourselves. But once we know, we can start to put on the isolation gear and stuff. I think it's interesting, because one of the things that I'm noticing about this virus is that people are taking more interest in what happens in healthcare now.
Yeah.
And like I see that with my sister, because my sister's in like business, and she's asking me all these questions now, and kind of and when I tell her like, oh, these are things we deal with all the time in healthcare, she's so surprised, because I'm like telling her like, yeah, the infections are not a new thing. Like, having the flu is not a new thing. Like it's just kind of like stuff we deal with all the time. And she is very surprised that this is something that, to me, I don't have that much of a reaction toward. Like I'm not as reactionary toward it, because I see it so much. That like I do recognize this is not just another flu, in the sense that it is spreading faster, and it's causing a lot of problems, and it's like causing economic problems. But I think beyond the economic part of it, if we were to take away the effects that it's having in the economy, it's pretty similar to a flu. Like in terms of biology, it's still very similar to a flu.
Right. But isn't the fact that it spreads more easily the element that distinguishes it from the flu? In the sense of
Well,
more people can get the coronavirus and then die from it?
like yes and no. So die from it, no, but yes to contagion. So there's the WHO had this like graph, all the different like viruses put on a chart. I don't know if you saw that.
I did.
You should definitely add that to the video.
I will add it.
It's a very good graph. If you see where corona is, like it's kind of in the more contagious but not as deadly space. Whereas if we compare it to something like I think chickenpox is extremely contagious, but like 0 on the deadly scale, or something like smallpox, which was the deadliest disease known to humanity, and it's been eradicated, but it's not even comparable to that. If you just look at that graph and see where coronavirus sits in relation to all these other things, it's not like it's a bit more than the flu, a bit more deadly, a bit more contagious. I don't remember if it's actually more contagious, but it's like a little bit higher range. But it's not the level of a lot of like very deadly things that we've seen in the world. Again, we do have to be careful, because the whole point of all of this is that vulnerable people can die, and that's who we're trying to protect. But in trying to protect them, we're actually not helping them, because now we're going to the stores, we're buying out everything, and then you have all these vulnerable people who we are supposed to have been protecting by all of these measures. They can't even get the resources they need because we've taken them all.
What about lung damage? It says that if you do have coronavirus, you actually suffer your lung capacity is reduced by 20 to 30%. And this is what I read, I don't know if this is true. And then you can't breathe as well when you walk fast.
Well, yes, that's the whole point of having a respiratory issue. Like that's what it is. But like that's not the case with everybody, and that's usually more of a severe situation. Again, there's like it varies between every person. That's the problem. Like it's different. Everyone's bodies reacts differently to it. but they do have like the majority of cases have been very old people. It has been vulnerable populations, not so much kids. And they found the same thing with SARS, was that kids are, there was no deaths from children for SARS, and they're not seeing any for this either. I think they did report some ICU cases of younger people recently, but they're not major case. Like, it's not a common thing to see. Like, it's very uncommon for kids not to get over this. And for most kids, I think it just presents as such a minor flu that most parents are not even testing their kids. Like, we're barely seeing any kids kind of coming in for this. So that's a good thing in that way.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that makes sense. Well,
Yeah.
thank you so much for
You're
joining us.
welcome.